You've tried seemingly everything to get healthy, to drop some weight, to fully optimize your hormones, or you're just not feeling the level of vitality that you know you could. Stick around because our guest this week might just have your solution. In this episode, we discuss the ins and outs of detoxification, why it's necessary, the real threat it poses, some of the worst hidden offenders, and perhaps most importantly, what you can do about it. The simple tweaks that make the biggest difference. Our guest this week is Dr. Wendie Trubow. As a functional medicine gynecologist, she's passionate about helping women optimize their health and lives. Although, don't worry, this episode applies to everyone. Through her struggles with mold and metal toxicity, celiac disease, and other health issues, Dr. Trubow has developed a deep sense of compassion and expertise for what her patients are feeling. She is the co-author of a book called Dirty Girl: Ditch the Toxins, Look Great, and Feel Freaking Amazing. And she has been regularly featured in Mind Body Green and Huffington Post. Dr. Trubow is an accomplished speaker and previously had her own television show. She is on the faculty at A4M and a speaker for their conferences, along with other national societies. She and her partner will be releasing their new book in 2024. I recently also wrote a guide to cellular detoxification. You can find that along with everything we discuss, as well as a link to Dr. Trubow's book, Dirty Girl, in the show notes for this episode, which you'll find at mindbodypeak.com/144. You can also follow her work at 5journeys.com. Okay, let's bring in Dr. Wendie Trubow. Dr. Wendie Trubow, welcome to Mind Body Peak Performance.
Thanks. Great to be here.
It's an honor to be hosting you today. We've been coordinating this one for about 3 or 4 months now, so I'm glad that we're able to make it happen. And today we are going to be discussing the role of detoxification and endocrine disrupting chemicals and some of the insights that you gleaned when researching and writing your book, Dirty Girl. Well, let's start off today with the unusual non-negotiables you've done for your health, your performance, and your bioharmony.
This is such an interesting conversation because I always say you have to deal with the platforms of your health before you get into the cooler, higher order stuff of detox and optimization. And so I think it just deserves being acknowledged that you have to deal with the foundations. What are the foundations? You have to eat food that looks like real food. Sleep, especially in America, we're like chronically underslept and proud of it. I got by on 4 hours of sleep. I'm like, that's not good. And one of the reasons it's not good is that when you don't sleep, you don't detox. And when you don't detox, you're full of nasty chemicals that then make you fat, sick, and feel dead. So it's really important to get more sleep. It's important that you poop every day. Some of my patients are like, every day? Really? I'm like, yeah, even twice a day. So poop at least once a day. It's called the oroanal reflex. I remember learning it in med school and being like, that's the weirdest thing. Even by then I was sick, I didn't know it. And then move your body, get sweaty 4 or 5 times a week. It's hard to do every day, but get sweaty as often as you can. And then don't engage in toxic behaviors or relationships. That's a harder one for a lot of us, right? So that's the foundation of your health. And then you get to, okay, what are the cool non-negotiable things? So I would say most of my non-negotiables fall into the foundational category, meaning I don't eat food that is brightly colored. I don't eat things that I don't believe are food. So my non-negotiables stem from I wear my Whoop all the time so I can see how's my recovery and how's my heart rate, how's my body temp, how's my respiratory rate, am I getting enough sleep, am I moving my body, and am I eating food that's real food. Those are what I'll call my non-negotiables. And then there's the fun stuff, right? But that's more when I have the time and the optional and based on how I'm feeling. So it's an ebb and a flow.
So what do you do based on the data you get from your wearables? Like say you see you have a low HRV or your resting heart rate was higher last night, or there's your respiration rate was high. There's a lot of different things you can look at. Like what do you do with that information?
I really, especially in the days of COVID, I really lean into that data so that I can very quickly tell when I'm getting sick and respond appropriately. So that's one way. And then the other is, it's very interesting. It doesn't always match. Like today, I woke up and I'm like bright green. I'm at 88%. I'm like, I don't feel that. I do not feel that today. So I use it as a gauge, although it's not the holy grail, but I do use it like, how am I doing? And how do I need to tailor my workouts? I got to the gym yesterday and I was like, I'm not feeling it. So the thing that I realized is everything's better than nothing. So there's no imperfect action. If you go to the gym, you don't do a perfect job, it's better than not going at all. So I use it to help gauge how hard of a workout will I do? Do I need to pay attention? Am I getting sick? Do I need to boost my D and my minerals and nutrients? Like what's happening in there?
That's a great way to use it. I use it like that too, for a second opinion, second voice. Like after I've checked in the morning, see how I actually feel. Then I look to see what the data says. If I look, and if I'm under recovered, then I will take off a set of my workout for each of the exercises so that I'm not pushing myself up against the brink of potential injury or nervous system burnout or anything else that you don't want by under recovering and pushing yourself too hard consistently for long periods. Do you do anything detox related or anything like that based on your wearable data?
So not based on the wearable data. My detox behaviors are centered around the lab data that I get. And also how we were chatting before we started recording about if I'm traveling and I'm staying in places where the air quality might not be great or the water quality might be great, I'll amp up detox when I come home. So detox for me is my thing, right? Like I do it every day, all day, regardless of how I feel. There's some part of detox in my life. So exercise is detox. Get sweaty, you get rid of your toxins, move the lymph, get the body moving. I do chlorella and I do cilantro, the liquid form of cilantro.
Why
And
liquid
I
form?
do propylman. Actually, because I can't stand the flavor and the liquid form isn't as offensive. And then I do propylman and fiber in the morning and at night. Actually, the propylman and fiber is a strain of fiber that binds to all the strains of mycotoxins and also helps with metals. So it's like a twofer. So I do that. I support my adrenals every day. One, because I live in America. Two, because I am like a high performing, high stress human and I feel it. And three, because if your adrenals are messy, you're not going to do detox because they'll say to the system, hey, lion's coming. Don't do detox. Focus on getting rid of the sugar from your liver so that you can run away. So I do adrenal support. Then I take a multivitamin that's geared for liver support, has a full range of activated B vitamins as well as NAC, L-carnitine, alpha lipoic acid. Before I leave the house, I take glutathione and C in liposomal form along with some peptides. That's only like
That's a comprehensive list just to start off your morning too.
I know. And then at night, like 3 to 5 nights a week, depending on the night, I do a sauna. And then I repeat that same thing at night with the cilantro, the fiber. I take melatonin almost all the time. The glutathione I take depending on whether I can fit it in. And then I also take a fiber in one of my drinks that helps bind metals.
Yeah. So what do you think are like, maybe it varies from person to person, but what are like the highest impact of all those things that you said and take and do?
Yeah. I mean, I really do believe that the foundational things are the most impactful because you can't detox on a broken foundation. And everybody needs to detox, except just by sleeping enough. When you hit that deep sleep, the cells in your body, particularly your brain, shrink down. So think of the highway between the cells as getting wider. That allows more to drain out. So I would say sweaty exercise, amazing quality food, and sleep are the most impactful things that you can do. And I know this is about biohacking. So we're supposed to be all these cool things. And sure, I can tell you a million things to do, but if you're not moving, sleeping, and you're eating crappy food, it's useless. And I say that to people, right? Like I have amazing supplements in our office, but if you abuse your body, it's not going to help.
I read a long time ago that when you sweat via exercise, perhaps it's because you've engaged your adrenals more in your sympathetic nervous system, that you can't detoxify as effectively or efficiently as you can if you sauna. And of course, you want to do both. But is it true that when you sauna, you're able to like stay in a more parasympathetic-ish state, and that allows you to like detox in either deeper ways or ways you can't otherwise?
Yeah, I would say you can absolutely burn out your adrenals by over-exercising. I would say there are certain forms of sauna, especially the near, mid, far infrared that get really at all levels of the body that are very effective for detox. And like I'll go in the sauna for an hour and it takes 25 minutes to really get a full on sweat. And I do dry brushing and I heat the sauna up beforehand. And it's still, no matter what I do, even if I walk in and it's 150, it takes me 20 minutes to start sweating. But if I did that level of sweating, and really it's full body, if I got to that level of exertion with exercise, I would absolutely tank my adrenals. So
Yeah, and I want to go into like a detoxification protocol, like the way you'd structure it. Because I wrote a guide a while back, like all these different things you can do, and then someone left a comment and they asked, "So how do I actually structure this?" And I was like, "Ooh, this is actually, I'm sure, a lot more complicated than I'm thinking." So we'll talk about that in a second. But first, I want to paint the picture, like 10,000 foot overview. Why does detoxification matter in the first place? You said something last time we talked that I thought was profound and stuck in my head, and that is that toxins underpin inflammation, which underpins disease. But I will give the floor to you, and you can elaborate on the things we should know about why this matters in the first place.
yeah, well, let's take even a step back from that. And I'll say, uh, you don't get sick because you're getting older. You don't get diseases just because you've lived on this earth for a certain amount of time. You get diseases because your system gets clogged. What does your system get clogged with? Toxins. And when your system gets clogged, it goes down any number of pathways that demonstrate that your body is stressed. So for some people, they'll get a headache. Other people will have low sex drive. Other people will have irritable bowel. Someone else will have an autoimmune disease. But age in and of itself isn't the problem. It's all that stuff we're getting exposed to that then challenges the system, creates a state of inflammation, and then bam, we have some type of diagnosis, right? You had the problem before you had the diagnosis. You just didn't have the diagnosis, but you still have the toxins. So, yes, toxins underpin everything. And when you get to a full rain barrel, your rain barrel overflows, you have symptoms, and then you go to the doctor and you get a diagnosis. And when I use the term toxins, I'm being very liberal. So I'm including a toxic thought pattern. I'm including toxic relationships. I'm including too much of a good food that's acting in a way that's bad for you. So, in and of itself, gluten is not a nasty thing, although it has been hybridized and it's full of glyphosate. So the things that have been done to it make it nasty and make the impact on our body bad, but it's not intrinsically bad. Coffee isn't intrinsically bad. But if you drink too much of it and it's full of pesticides and mold, then you get the negative impact. So I'm including a really wide range of things in toxins. Not sleeping is toxic. Over exercising is toxic. Under exercising is toxic, right? You got to get the sweet spot. And the sweet spot for you is not the sweet spot for someone else. So it's really important to do what works in your body, not works. And, your good friends like, oh, I can exercise for 8 hours. I'm like, I can't do that.
And then there's those that are when you have anything out of balance, like in excess or too little of it, that can be toxic. But what about the endocrine disrupting chemicals? Are those good or healthy in some very small, minute quantity, or are those exceptions to that?
Let's back up a step. The body's designed to be self-cleaning, right? The liver is supposed to clean us out. Our sweat gets rid of toxins. We pee stuff out. We poop stuff out. And that's awesome, except that as we walk through our days, it's essentially impossible to go through the day without being exposed to some type of endocrine disrupting plastic or endocrine disrupting chemical or source. So in the New York Times last year, this guy, one of the reporters, said he was determined to go a week without any plastic. And that's also without touching any plastic. So he couldn't drive his car. When he went on the subway, he had to bring a wooden stool. He had to borrow clothes because he didn't have any clothes that had no plastic in them. He couldn't type because guess what your keyboard is? Plastic. What's your mouse? Plastic. If we just had one of those things, yeah, sure, the body can deal with it. So it's less about is any amount safe, and it's more about what amount can our body deal with. And I would say it's hard to say because it's so pervasive, right? I'm sitting on this vegan leather chair. What's vegan leather? Plastic. And so there's not really a safe amount, particularly because it's so ubiquitous. It's everywhere. We can't get away from it. We're deluged, right? And then the liver's like, oh my God, be nice to me. And don't forget, if you're female, you're making hormones that need to be processed through the liver, in addition to those endocrine disrupting hormones that look like, or sorry, chemicals that look like your hormones, except they bind more tightly to your receptors. So now your body's completely confused. So I think women are more at risk because we make more estrogen than men do. And estrogen is particularly nasty at when it gets dominant. It behaves in ways like heavy periods, frequent periods, fibroids, fertility challenges. So for women, it's even worse.
Yeah, there's the xenoestrogens that come from plastic and from like other sources. And then there's also phytoestrogens, and like the estrogens that act the same that come from food. Would you say that the phytoestrogens are also similarly destructive?
I think those are a little less destructive. They like soy, soy binds to the estrogen receptors. It binds weakly. Again, too much of a good thing can be bad for you. So if you're going to use soy as a healthy source of protein and you're eating it in its minimally processed form and it's organic, I don't really think that's a big deal.
Is there such thing as a clean plastic or plastic that doesn't have all these disruptive chemicals?
Yes and no. So the plastics that are hard plastics do give off less. So for example, I was able to find metal shaker bottles. It's funny, we got one, someone gave us one, and I was so psyched because it was all metal, except it was massive and I have little hands, so I couldn't actually get my hands around it to use. So when I'm shaking it, I'm using both hands. So the harder plastics are better than the softer plastics, but I would not store food in a hard plastic container. I'm okay with the tops. Like we have metal storage. They're stainless steel, and then the tops have the hard plastic that clicks on. We don't ever put the food up top so that it touches the top. So if you store food in the container and then you close it, I think that's probably fine.
I thought that I had done a great job of removing all the plastics from my life, or as much as I possibly could, until I realized about a year ago that I was making my coffee and I was putting it in a Vitamix. And I realized I'm putting a very, very hot liquid into that. So what I started doing is I started cooling it down before I put it in. And of course, it's better just to have a glass blender container to begin with. But at least if it's not scalding hot, it's going to leach less microplastics and less of the chemicals into the drink.
Well, think about it. I can't even tell you how many people don't recognize that cute little plastic pod that they make their coffee in is forcing endocrine disrupting chemicals right into their coffee. Someone said to me, I said to her yesterday, like, okay, we're going to want to make sure that the coffee you're drinking is organic and tested for mold. She goes, so I shouldn't go to Starbucks? I'm like, no, probably not. Like, because it's not organic. It's not tested for mold. She goes, okay, so I'll just go home and make it in my Keurig. I was like, oh, wait. Okay, wait a second. That's not any better. So I said to her, and we're talking about the gradations of it. I would actually prefer that you drink your Starbucks coffee over your Keurig because you're forcing this massive dose of endocrine disrupting hormones into your body. And as a woman, you're just not going to deal with that, especially given that, she's a woman of my age. We're postmenopausal and she's starting hormones. I'm like, I don't really want you on hormones. And then I'm giving you this stuff that looks like a hormone and it's just compounding the issue. So I do think there's gradations, but if you push hot water through your little plastic cup, you're getting a daily dose of endocrine disrupting hormones. So of chemicals. So don't do that, right? French press it. They've shown that filtered coffee is better than unfiltered. So pour it through water, French press it, whatever. But
And the other issue I've noticed is a lot of companies now proudly market how their plastic bottles are BPA free. And that's great. They've finally removed like a super toxic substance from the bottle itself. But then they've replaced the BPA with BPE and BPS and BP, all these other similar like, derivatives.
my babysitter's taken over cooking because I work a lot. But I used to cook a lot, like 5 days a week, and I use canned beans. And every time I open a can, I'm like, this is nonstick, right? And they got to make it nonstick in some way. And so it's plastic. So I keep thinking to myself, okay, I got to soak the beans. I got to get organized enough to soak the beans ahead of time. It's just beyond me, right? Sunday morning, I'll say, okay, I want to make taco night tonight. Well, at that point, I could probably put it in the Instapot and pressure cook it. But yeah, it's really hard to deal with it. Do your best, make a better choice wherever possible, and don't sweat the small stuff. Focus on removing it on the other end.
And if you have to choose to remove anything, choose the thing that's putting the hot liquid in the closest proximity with the plastic.
I do say to people, look, as you're running out of your home cleaning items, your dishwashing detergent, your washing machine, all of that, as you're running out of that, that's a really good time to level up. But it's so challenging when we invest money in something and then we're like, oh, that wasn't the best, right? So I totally feel you, because I don't have a glass blender at this point either. It is that hard plastic, and I don't put anything hot in it.
So we've already talked about any hot liquids that touch plastic are a good thing to at least remove or consider removing. What else? What else would be on your list of like the highest impact things to remove? Because we could go over a list of like 200, 300 different things and just be scratching the surface. So like if you had to stack rank things that are most helpful for people to consider, maybe perhaps the things they wouldn't even consider to begin with.
Don't scent your house. That stuff you plug in and the stuff you spray to make your house fine all has endocrine disrupting chemicals in it. So if you feel that you must have a smell in your house, get a diffuser and put essential oils in it. Otherwise, everything else is full of chemicals that messes up your system. And what's nice is it's so much cheaper to have a diffuser with some, you use 1 drop of an essential oil. It's not like you're using a whole bottle, which costs $20, right? It'll last you for a year. Don't spray stuff that smells. That's endocrine disrupting. As you run out of your beauty product, your makeup, your shampoo, your lotion, your hair colorant, whatever that is, right? Fill in the blank. That's when you want to level up. And that happens, especially for women, all the time, right? Like I'm always running out of something. For house cleaning, dishwashing detergent, washing machine detergent, floor cleaner, bathroom cleaner, all that stuff, I love Aspen Clean. It's a company that their environmental working group certified. So it's clean and it's not toxic. It's not harsh. It's not bleach. Okay. If you love bleach, it is not bleach. Okay. But bleach is endocrine disrupting. So pick your poison. For beauty products, I use pretty much 3 things for salves and serums and lotions. I use Purity Woods, which is one of my friends has created, and it's not EWG certified, but it's basically organic. I use Vintage Traditions, which is lotion. And I use Beauty Counter. Those are the 3 things I use for stuff I put on myself. Other than for lotion, I use Everyone. And that's also EWG certified. And then for makeup, it's Burt's Bees, Mineral Fusions, or Beauty Counter. And that's kind of it. And I don't do my nails. If you're going to color your hair, look for something. There's Overtone in the UK that is cleaner. Don't take your clothes to the dry cleaner because they use formaldehyde, unless you can find a cleaner that uses steam to clean the clothes, which is really rare. Don't take your clothes to the dry cleaner because they use formaldehyde. Don't burn the scented candles. Level up on what you're cleaning your house with. Oh, here's one that you're not going to like. You ready? Don't drink alcohol.
I saw that one coming.
Nobody likes when I say that. So basically, your liver does your detox, and your liver prioritizes how bad is this? How quickly do I need to deal with it? And when the liver gets alcohol, it is considered a clear and present danger. Your liver stops the presses for all other behaviors and just deals with the alcohol. And that means you're not detoxing from the 1,001 things you got exposed to in the course of your day, all of which are endocrine disrupting. And when I say endocrine disrupting, these are things that mess up your hormones, mess up your sex drive, mess up your ability to lose weight, make you put on weight in places that you don't want to have weight. Men get boobs, women get big bellies and big butts. And so you get things that you're not psyched to have, right? I'm not like, yay, my bum's bigger. I'm like, oh my God, I must have more endocrine disrupting things I'm exposed to.
One thing that's hard for me to determine is like where this stacks in terms of like a whole health optimization program. Like, of course, it's important to have a clean system, but like So you're doing the basics, you're sleeping, you're moving, you're de-stressing, you're getting your morning light, et cetera, then how do you know when it's time to focus on your detoxification? How do you know that it needs attention versus I can just like continue eating clean and doing these other healthy living things and I will like reach my goals? Perhaps how do you know like when your goals are being hindered by toxification?
I would say if you live on this earth, you need to focus on detox in some way. If you're human and you live on the earth, you got to focus on it. Now, then the degree to how much you need to focus on it depends how sick you are. So if you have fewer chemicals and fewer exposures earlier in life. So if you're before 35, you have less. But I will say that it's shocking to me how many people need assistance with fertility, fertility assisted reproduction, IVF, intrauterine insemination. I only know a very few number of people who got pregnant spontaneously. The rest of them need help. And this has happened in my career. And I've been in practice for almost 25 years. This is the delayed response impact to all of these endocrine disrupting chemicals is it messes up our fertility. And so, okay, so going back to it, how hard you prioritize detox depends directly on how sick you are. So meaning you get up in the morning, you feel fantastic. Your body is exactly how you want it to be. You can exercise beautifully. Your brain works. You have no gut issues, meaning you don't notice your gut. You get up and poop in the morning. You poop after you eat. It's never bloated or gassy or painful or constipated or diarrhea. None of that stuff. Your periods are picture perfect. Your sex drive is perfect. You have no trouble with an erection. You have no trouble getting lubricated or having an orgasm. You're just perfect. Everything works like it's supposed to. It's all invisible. I literally don't know a single human who can claim that. Okay. But okay, if that's you, you can ignore literally everything I've said because you're strong like a bull and nothing impacts you. Cool. Fine. Okay. Then there's the rest of us. Okay. You get up and you're a little bit fatigued. A good night's sleep fixes it. Fine. Okay. Focus on the platform stuff. But then you start to notice that after a couple of days of doing what you'll consider the right thing, and this is not a moral conversation. You're not bad if you don't do it. You're not good if you do it. You're simply healthier if you do it. So a few days of doing what works for your body and you still don't feel like $1,000,000, or there's a part of your body that's not invisible. I always say like your whole body should be like your right elbow. You don't notice it. It doesn't hurt. It doesn't bother you. There's no rash on it. It's just invisible. Your gut should be like that. Your brain should be like that. Everything should be invisible. If it's not, and it doesn't recover within a day or so of rest, then it's time to focus on detox because you're starting to show symptoms. If your doctor says to you, oh, you're 20 pounds overweight, or your ideal body weight is 20 pounds less, or you're metabolically unstable, or you're pre-diabetic, or you have metabolic syndrome X, or you have PCOS, those are all signs that the body is screaming to be addressed. So pretty much if you have a diagnosis of anything, autoimmune disease, metabolic disease, cardiovascular disease, cardiometabolic disease, cancer, degenerative disease, any of those, any diagnoses, that is your warning cry that you need to get started on this because it only gets worse. It doesn't get better. It only gets worse.
So if you feel like you're aging prematurely and you've done the basics, then this would be a good place to look just to initially evaluate your exposures and then from there creating or following a protocol to address this. I'm sure people are wondering at this point, if all of these products we've named so far have toxins, why were they allowed in the first place? Like, why are these chemicals not banned?
You literally just threw gasoline on the fire. So unfortunately, Europe is a little bit different, but not totally. In the United States, things are fine until they're shown to be bad. Kind of like you're innocent until presumed guilty, until found guilty. You're presumed healthy or safe until it's shown beyond a preponderance of evidence that you are not safe. So actually the EPA and I are the same age. We were born in 1970. We're the same age. And in its lifetime, the EPA has banned 9 chemicals. So for people who aren't math people, I was born in 1970. We're recording in 2024. So the EPA is turning 54 years old. And in its 54-year history, it's banned 9 chemicals. The EPA does not evaluate chemicals presumptively. It only evaluates chemicals when the company says, or there's an outcry of, we think this isn't good for us. And then it's referred to the EPA for evaluation. At any given time, the EPA can evaluate like 100 to 200 chemicals, but there's a backlog of something like 10,000 years. The EPA is tremendously backlogged. Now layer on corporate special interest or corporate pressure. And now layer on that the EPA has no teeth. So it can say this is really bad, but it really has no enforcement ability, which is why essentially it falls into our laps, because you cannot presume that it's safe. You need to presume that it's full of chemicals, not that it's safe.
Is Teflon banned? I know that I've read about that. I've seen documentaries on it, and I assumed it was just gone off the shelves based on like all the information that came out about it, but it's still available.
It's not banned. It's everywhere. It's really challenging to get stuff that's not Teflon.
The good cooking materials, would you say that's like stainless steel and ceramic?
Stainless steel, ceramic, and cast iron.
Yeah.
Those are the three.
How do you use information about your genetics, whether it's in relation to detoxification or in general?
There's a lot of ways you can use it. So one, let's talk about BRCA, the breast cancer gene. People understand that. You know, if you have BRCA, there's BRCA1 and BRCA2. If you have BRCA1, you have like a 50 to 80% chance of getting breast cancer. If you have BRCA2, it's like 60 to 80, you know, it's not 100%. And then there's also the risk of ovarian cancer with both of them. So I usually use the genes to inform my path. So for example, I have 2 genes for vitamin D deficiency. But vitamin D, it's not a vitamin, it's actually a hormone, and it helps regulate gut functions. The tight junctions in the gut are regulated by vitamin D, your immune system, your bone health. And so that's really a crappy thing to have deficiency of. You know, vitamin D deficiency is terrible for you. And I always noticed that when I checked my level is always low. Like, you know, never. I take so much D, it would be ridiculous. Most people would be over 100 and they'd be told take less, but I'm like 40. And I take 20,000 IUs. I'm not recommending that you take 20,000 IUs, but I take 20,000. It's a lot. I don't do it every day. I do it like 5 days a week, and I'm still not budging, right? So I use the genetics along with the clinical numbers. So if I had these 2 genes, but they weren't turned on, epigenetically they were dormant. If I had these 2 mutations and they hadn't turned on and my D level's 80, right, I wouldn't need as much. But when you layer on, I have these genes, I have the celiac, which messed up the absorption, and then these genes are clearly activated and the levels are low, that informs my behavior that I take more vitamin D. For example, I did all the genetics on my kids, and I asked for a discount because I had 2 kids who got their adenoids out on the same day. The older one who went has the worst detox profile, kind of like mine, terrible detox. And the youngest who went, my bookends went, and the youngest has like a normal detox profile. So after the surgery, and I didn't tell them that really, I wasn't like, you're going to be a poor recovery. I was just like, well, let's give you some glutathione because you're older than your sibling, right? So the older one took significantly longer to recover after the surgery. And this is the oldest one, was the one who was a severely growth restricted preemie, born at 33 weeks, as at risk of metabolic issues, and has this terrible, has my genes and has the terrible detox profile. And so I use it to inform things like, if you're going to have surgery, do you need to amp up your glutathione and your C before your surgery and after your surgery? If you have one or both of the genes for celiac and you eat gluten and you're not $1,000,000 in terms of how you feel, it's often a good idea to get rid of gluten, because genetically, if you have the gene, when you eat, here's a horrifying fun fact. If you don't have the genes and you eat gluten, you open the tight junctions for about 15 minutes in any given day, anytime you eat it. But if you have the gene and you eat gluten, you have more receptors, this CXCR3 receptor. And when it gets bound by gliadin, it causes the tight junctions to open. And guess what? It lasts for 4 hours. So if you have the gene, even if you don't have celiac, you open your tight junctions for 4 hours. Now, standard American diet, bagel for breakfast or pancakes. And then what do you have for lunch? A wrap. What do you have for dinner? Pasta and chicken and broccoli. Okay, you've now eaten gluten the whole day. Your tight junctions have been open the whole day. So that kind of thing is invisible for people, but accept that you can have skin issues, concentration issues, weight issues, irritable bowel, but you don't have celiac. So people are like, oh, you can keep eating that. Except don't forget, it's full of glyphosate. It's been hybridized. It's much more virulent than it was 80 years ago. So I use the genes to inform my clinical recommendations. I can say to someone, you're not going to get celiac, but you can have gluten sensitivity. You have low vitamin D levels. Here we are. You have the genes for vitamin, it all comes together. Or like if you're a crappy detoxer, you're going to need to work harder on your detox than someone who has great detox genes. They might not even have the problem in the first place.
Did you explain why you wouldn't want to open up your tight junctions, let alone for 4 hours, multiple times through the day?
I didn't explain it. We should totally talk about that. Okay. So your mouth to your anus is your GI tract. And it's crazy. It's lined with, the lining of it is one cell wall thick, which is crazy to think that what separates you from the world is one cell thick, but that's how it is. And the cells are lined up and they are stuck together, like they're glued together, and they just, keep going. And when you open up the tight junctions, it's not only gluten that can open them, but when you open them, either from food or medication or stress or major accident or illness, there's a million things that can cause it. Those tight junctions open. And now, instead of there being this unbroken tube from your mouth to your anus that you get to choose what you take up, you have opened up the space between the cells. And now it's anything that can fit through gets into your bloodstream. Food particles, toxins like mycotoxins, heavy metals, pathogens, bacteria, who knows, right? Anything that can fit through that space gets in. And now your bloodstream is like, what's going on here? Right? I was just minding my own business, and here we are. Now I have to deal with this influx of random things that the system recognizes as foreign. So now your immune system starts to get jacked up. And if you get exposed to enough of those things, some of these particles often look like the pieces of our body. And the thyroid in particular is very, very susceptible to this. So people often start to attack their own thyroid because it's confused. The immune system is like, wait, you look like you, so I'm going to attack the thyroid because it thinks it's the thyroid. But it can happen, that's basically an autoimmune event. So when you open the tight junctions, your outside world, bacteria, pathogens, heavy metals, toxins, food particles, all gets exposed to your immune system. And the more it gets exposed, the worse it is, and the more challenged your immune system is. So you want those tight junctions to be closed.
And when you're working on a gut health protocol to seal the gut lining, what are some of the things that you would like to do to oppose that, to counteract those effects? Obviously, removing gluten is going to be a big one, but there's other things, like you mentioned, a bunch of different ways that is triggered, that we open those tight junctions. Are there any things like foods or supplements or things we can do to tighten them again?
Tons. So I think the first question is, why are your tight junctions open in the first place? Is it because you're eating gluten all the time? Is it because you're super stressed? Is it because you've been ill? You can develop leaky gut, which is essentially the name for open tight junctions if you have a car accident or you have a bad breakup or you lose your job or something traumatic happens. You can develop leaky gut, just like that. So we always start with, food is medicine. You are what you eat. And so let's start by putting into your body things that work for your body. I'm not a huge fan of everyone needs to eat like this, but I am a huge fan of everyone needs to focus on unprocessed in its relatively natural state, whether cooked or not too messed with, low sugar, no alcohol. You can have grains. I don't have a problem with grains. And I was just talking to someone who looked at the genetics behind how we eat. And some people genetically, if you hail from Native American or Asian or Indian cultures, you're going to do better with a keto style eating because your body doesn't do as well with carbs. Depending on where you're from in the world, it actually influences how you do with carbs. So know your body, right? And know whether you do well with carbs, you don't do well with carbs, that's going to drive the bus. Food is platform. Managing the stressor, right? You got to take away the source. If you're sitting on a tack, stop sitting on the tack. Take away the stressor. If you're sitting on 10 tacks, take away the tacks so you're not sitting on them. Alcohol causes leaky gut. So get rid of the alcohol. Get enough rest. That's the doingness. And then the doingness in terms of supplements is a huge range of things. L-glutamine can help heal the gut. There are different types of IgG that can help heal the gut. I take a peptide called larazotide acetate that's actually based on the drug that Alessio Fasano is developing that helps the tight junctions stay closed. And so you can take peptides, can help.
Do you like colostrum?
I do like colostrum. I don't use it a lot, but I do like it.
Yeah, it's nice having all those options. And one other thing that I think can cause or worsen leaky gut is the certain NSAIDs, the non-steroidal inflammatory drugs.
And that depletes glutathione from the liver too. And glutathione is responsible for helping your liver detoxify all the stuff it's exposed to. So Tylenol, NSAIDs, Motrin, Aleve, all of those do deplete glutathione from the liver.
So Wendie, let's put this all together now. So you have the gut, you have the liver, you have the kidneys. Like, what's the order of operations here? How do you go about like designing a complete detoxification stack or protocol to make sure that you address things in the right order and you address everything that needs to be addressed?
When I look at the body, I'm looking at it, I call it the holy triad, or because the adrenals, the liver, and the gut are the triangle that if they're tanked, you're screwed, and if they're good, you're good. So the kidneys play a lesser role, in my opinion. So when I'm designing a protocol, first I need to fix, this is foundational. This is more foundational work. You have to make sure the gut is healthy. You have to make sure the adrenals are healthy. You have to make sure the liver is functioning. Okay, let's assume you've done that. And now this is where you have 80% of the agency. Okay, you really can. You have 80% of the agency. That last 20% is in what I do, meaning we test. What are the levels of your toxins? Do you have environmental toxins? Do you have heavy metals? Do you have mycotoxins? What's happening in there? Get the data. And then we're designing a custom plan for you. And there's definitely things that cross over. So N-acetylcysteine helps the liver make glutathione. So we give people N-acetylcysteine. We give them the fiber that binds the mycotoxins and the metals. We give them the cilantro. We give them DMSA, which is a prescription. The other three things are not prescription, but the DMSA is prescription.
And that's a prescription binder, right?
Yes.
If you didn't have access to DMSA, are there any alternatives? Like cilantro is like a weak.
Cilantro is weaker. Cilantro, parsley, chlorella, spirulina. I mean, these are great things. You're not going to harm yourself taking cilantro, parsley, chlorella, and spirulina. And we lean on those heavily, especially because, first do no harm, right? You're not going to harm yourself doing that. So especially if you're doing it on your own and you say, okay, I don't really want to do the data. I'm not ready for a full-on eval. You can simply do these things and you won't harm yourself, and it'll help keep your body cleaned out, right? So when you're designing it, what's the data? And then let's be targeted, right? And the really nice thing is that we do the 17-page report on all these environmental toxins. So it's overwhelming, right? You're like, oh my God, I have 9 toxins and they're really high, and what do I do? But here's the nice thing. That massive list, the treatment for them funnels into a very small number of interventions. N-acetylcysteine, activated B vitamins, sauna, glutathione, glycine. These are all things that it really kind of funnels in. So even if you have, say you had 17 of the 17 positive, right? You're a hot mess. Still, it only funnels into like 6 different things for treatment. So it's really nice. So I would say if you had to design a sort of platform, what would be a good detox approach? I would say cilantro extract, N-acetylcysteine, fiber. If you're alive, you need a B vitamin, a B complex, an activated B complex, fish oil that's been tested for mercury, right? You don't want to take it in as you're trying to be good. And then vitamin D.
What about Glynac instead of just NAC?
Totally fine. You're not going to harm yourself with it. So have at it.
What's your approach to testing? Is it mostly blood labs, or is it hair mineral testing, or something completely different?
Yeah, none of the above. We don't do blood unless we need to prove that you're not having an active exposure to heavy metals. So otherwise, it will be sequestered. So your body knows it's toxic. After 4 to 6 weeks, it is not in the bloodstream. It's stored in your bones, fat, organs, brain. So we don't do blood, and I don't like hair analyses. largely because it's not telling me what's stored. It's only telling me what can you voluntarily get rid of. Well, if you have crappy detox and your detox mechanisms are shut down, you're going to do your hair analysis and you'll be like, oh, I have nothing. Well, okay, not true. You're just not showing it. So we actually do urine testing. For heavy metals, we do a baseline test to see and make sure there's no exposure occurring. And then we do a provoked test using the DMSA because that heavily leans on or pulls on mercury and lead. And those are the two big ones, although we are looking at thallium and arsenic and cadmium. So we're doing a provoke test for that. And then for mycotoxins, you do a hot bath and then you pee. That's the test. Super easy. Also urine. And then for the environmental toxins, take a hot bath and pee. There's the test. So that's typically what we're doing is a lot of urine testing. And I think there is stool testing, but who wants to do stool testing? Nobody likes it. Pee, people are generally okay with.
Okay, so that's a fairly simple approach, but I see what you mean. It requires some like understanding of how everything works, and correct my knowledge of this, but the way like the body creates fat cells a lot of times to harbor and store toxins in them because they're less conductive, they're insulated. And so perhaps if you have a lot of extra weight, it could be because of endocrine disrupting chemical exposure or heavy metals or something like that. And if you go on like a really aggressive weight loss program, you're breaking down that fat, you're releasing those toxins into the bloodstream, giving them the opportunity to lodge in places like the brain where you really don't want them.
You're 100% right. And that's why people sometimes get really sick when they go on rapid weight loss programs because they're just having this massive efflux of toxins from the fat cells that their body isn't prepared to deal with. Or even carrying weight and say, I can't get rid of this weight, stubborn weight loss. That to me tracks back toxins, and we want to improve the holy triad or the holy triangle of your gut, your liver, or your adrenals, and open up those pathways so that you can detox, so that you can lose weight.
And also, as you're exercising, would you continue taking the binders you mentioned before, like all of the things?
Yeah, and it's great. Like if you're going to go in the bath or you're going to go in the sauna, take a binder before you go in, right? If you're raising your body temperature, you're going to start detoxing. So take binders before you go in the sauna. Take binders before bed. So one reason I take the fiber before bed, because you do detox while you're sleeping. So you might as well bind those up.
And I think fiber also has a really interesting role on the gut because it is able to be metabolized into butyrate. And butyrate, the short chain fatty acid, is like super gut protective and gut restorative.
Exactly. So it's like doing it's almost triple duty, right? Because it's got the mycotoxins, the metals, and it's feeding the good bacteria.
You've said mycotoxins a number of times. Can you explain what mycotoxins are and why you have multiple layers in your protocol to address them?
Mycotoxins is the fancy word for mold. And when mold gets into your body, it makes these toxins, and they're called mycotoxins. And they can do anything from make it hard to lose weight, to give you a rash, to mess with your brain function, to mess with your gut. All of these toxins are directly corrosive to the gut. And so people say, I don't understand why I have such irritable bowel. I'm like, well, you're doing everything right, but your gut is still being exposed to these things that are really messing with it. You think about 1 out of every 2 buildings has had water damage. So when you think about your life and the fact that most of us went to schools that were old and water damaged, we get exposure from school. We may have gotten exposure from our homes. Mold grows anytime there's water. So home, school, dorms, work, all the buildings, if we went to college, all those buildings, and then maybe you moved, and so there's another home. It's almost impossible to get through your life without getting exposure to mold in some way. And if you're sensitive, that's where the genetics go back, right? The genetics inform your risk of disease, essentially. And so if you're sensitive or you get an exposure and right? We went to look at a house over the summer last year, and I literally got 3 steps into the house and I went, no, there's mold here. I'm not going in. A, I'm not going in, and B, we're not buying this house. It was interesting because everyone else went in and spent time there, and there were 5 of us, everyone was sick. So if you're sensitive and you get exposure, you're going to notice it. And even if you're not sensitive, if you get a big enough exposure, you're going to notice it. And again, these are stored in your organs, your fat, your bones, your brain. More the fat than the bones, but it's stored. and it just sits there. And yes, it's encapsulated, but if you have enough of these toxins encapsulated, it becomes inflammatory. So it's angry fat, right? When people talk about angry fat, this is angry fat. It's not happy fat, it's angry fat.
That was my experience. I spent some time in a home that had that like very distinct musty scent when you walk in, like that, not a good scent. And I had no idea about mold at the time. I just noticed that I started getting like headaches. I started getting brain fog and just feeling like really low energy and bad. And eventually I left that place for vacation. I was like, wow, I feel night and day different now. And then I came back to it. And I'm like, oh, I feel exactly the same. And it's not just from being back from vacation. And I pieced it together. It actually has an impact on me. But that's something that you'd said you'd see in your genetics if you had like a higher than usual susceptibility to it. But then still, even if you weren't highly susceptible, you might notice an effect if you're like in tune with like your experience.
Yeah, it's super toxic. It is crazy talk. I mean, it's implicated in the stuff that tortures us, like you mentioned, the headaches, the brain fog, asthma, weight gain, rashes, eczema, psoriasis, all kinds of weird stuff. People are like, why do I have a rash? I'm like, well, we probably have mold or mycotoxins. And then the more insidious things like risk of cancer, risk of chronic illness, because it's pervasively bad for you. And so it's implicated whenever people come in for Alzheimer's evaluations because they're noticing some cognitive dysfunction. We're looking at toxins as one massive pathway that people walk down when they start to have cognitive decline. So heavy metals, mycotoxins, environmental toxins. Then there's hormones and endocrine and thyroid. There's infections like Lyme disease and Epstein-Barr. And then there's just flat out, like maybe you're super nutrient deficient, right? Those are the four major pathways that we're walking down to evaluate people.
And you can also get exposure to mycotoxins from food and drink, like the grains. Grains are a big one. Get coffee. Are there any in particular that you're wary of aside from those two?
Wine can be very moldy. Anything that gets harvested and sits, the farmers aren't like, oh, it's going to rain, so we're going to wait to harvest, right? They're harvesting when they're harvesting. So if it rained or if it doesn't rain, if you're getting a wet crop, it sits and it's wet. So oats, all the wheat, rice can be moldy, like everything can be moldy. Rice doesn't tend to be as moldy as when they, like bales of hay kind of stuff, when they thresh it. It's funny. I have a patient who has a farm. She has a farm and she has all these cows and horses, and she has these big bales of hay that she does herself. And she said to me, whenever I, pitchfork it in, I end up getting a rash. I'm like, is it organic? She goes, yeah, it's organic. I said, then it's moldy. And a bale of hay is moldy, no question. And so, yeah, there's tons of ways you get exposed and you don't even really think about it.
So with coffee and wine, they can test for those, and they do. And they often, like the more savvy brands, will actually mark them on the labels that they've been tested. But for oats and grains, can you find brands that are mycotoxin tested for those as well?
Not that I know of. And the bigger challenge with them is also that they often have glyphosate, which is a nasty herbicide. So it's like the holy grail to find mold tested organic grains. If you found that, I mean, I've never seen it. I've seen organic oats. I've not seen mold tested oats. I've not seen mold tested grains, really.
Well, Wendie, we'll start to wind down now. I have a few more questions for you before we sign off for the day. But first, if people want to connect with you, to pick up a copy of Dirty Girl and dive deeper into all this, how do they go about that?
We have 2 bricks and mortar in Massachusetts. So if you live in the Northeast and you want to be a patient, we accept insurance, and that's 5journeys.com. And then we have an online brand because most people don't live in the Northeast, and that's drwendie.com. And we have supplements, testing programs, coaching. We have sort of like a lifestyle wellness ability to engage with people. And I actually have a free gift for people, which is drwendie.com/gift, where you can get chapter 1 of the book. You can get a quiz to see how toxic are you. And you can get the non-toxic guide to healthy living so that you can start to level it up. Because like I did all this work, so you don't have to. The book you can get on Amazon, or if you come in the office, you can get it, or you can get it off Amazon.
I'll put a link to all this in the show notes for this episode. And I'll have to take that quiz. I have your book already, but I've not taken the quiz. So that will be on my to-do list. Now, if there was a worldwide burning of the books and all knowledge on earth is lost, but you get to save the works of 3 teachers, who would you choose and why?
So I would say Ayn Rand, because she was so clear about right and wrong and about the value of entrepreneurship. And she's just was a beautiful writer. Okay, so that's one. I think, is it Kant who wrote about philosophy and right and wrong? I'd probably save him, largely so that he can continue to guide us on issues of morality. And then probably Einstein, because he was so damn smart. It would be shocking to lose his work and awful. And then Stephen Hawking's would be probably the 4th.
It's a nice collection there. What was the biggest surprise you came across while researching for your book?
That tea bags have plastic.
Interesting.
I know. Someone said to me something about tea bags. I was like, what? What are you talking about? But yogi and traditional medicinals do not use plastic in their tea bags.
Why?
But all the other ones. Why would they? I know, but they do.
What's one thing that you're currently researching these days?
Probably more about how to language the link between toxins and metabolic dysfunction. I know it's there, but can I drill into the science and can I articulate it for people?
And then finally, what's one thing that your tribe does not know about you?
It's not about preferences, right? I hate okra. Okra hates me back too. No offense to anyone in the South who loves gumbo, but I would say most people probably don't know that I am very fatigued and I'm working on it.
How would you like to wrap this one up today?
What I'd like to leave people with is this is an overwhelming journey, and yet you do need to be on it, and yet you don't need to be perfect on it. You just need to be in the game, right? Everything is better than nothing, and it's never about perfection. It's only about improvement and iteration, and just don't stop playing.
Thanks for dropping in. It's been a pleasure chatting with you today on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
I'm Nick Urban here with Dr. Wendie Trubow, signing out from mindbodypeak.com. Have a great week and be an outlier. I hope that this has been helpful for you. If you enjoyed it, subscribe and hit the thumbs up. I love knowing who's in the 1% committed to reaching their full potential. Comment 1% below so that I know who you are. For all the resources and links, meet me on my website at mindbodypeak.com. I appreciate you and look forward to connecting with you. As a reminder, the information depicted in this video is for information purposes only. Please consult your primary healthcare professional before making any lifestyle changes.